Can one company be so powerful that it can destroy an entire country? It can poison its land, its fields, and its drinking water. It can make thousands, even millions of people sick with cancer on purpose, and then become so strong that it crushes every voice raised against it, even if it has to use the military. Big royal families of the world can support this company, and then this company can use money and media to hide. It sins because if the truth comes out, the whole world will shake. But now it's time to expose this story. The truth is that in today's video, we will tell you the story of such a company that put millions of lives at risk for its own benefit. This story starts in the 19th century. In 1833, there was a big businessman in London named Samuel. Samuel was in the import business of seashells. After Samuel died in 1870, his entire business went to his two sons. The elder son, Marcus, started exporting kerosene, which is also known as lamp oil. At that time, this oil was sent in barrels from one place to another on ships, but the problem was that these barrels leaked and oil was wasted. To solve this problem, Marcus designed oil tankers so that oil could be put directly into tanks at seaports. In 1892, for the first time, oil from Marcus's tankers crossed the Suez Canal and reached Asian markets, like Thailand and Indonesia, which were under British control at that time. This was the first time that the oil supply of Asia and Europe was connected by sea. Because of this trip, Marcus saw a big business opportunity. At that time, there was only one other company supplying oil, and that was Standard Oil, owned by the Rockefeller family. But Standard Oil was only supplying oil to Europe. When they learned that Marcus was taking his oil tankers to Asia, they offered him to also supply their tankers to Asia and take a commission in return. But Marcus had other ideas. He thought it was better to start his own oil trading company than to work for someone else. But this was a risky move because the Rockefellers were everywhere, and starting a company against them meant making enemies. However, without caring for anyone, in 1907, Marcus partnered with Royal Touch Petroleum to create a new company named Shell. Challenging Standard Oil was not easy, but thanks to a very high demand for oil at that time, Shell quickly became the top oil supply company in the world. Even in World War I, Shell was the largest supplier of oil to the British Army. In fact, some documents even say that if Shell hadn't been there, the Allies might never have defeated the Germans. After World War I, two things were established. First, oil was the most important resource of the 20th century, and whoever controls the oil supply will rule the world. Second, Shell had beaten Standard Oil to become the largest oil company in the world. But the biggest problem with oil is that you can't just increase its supply or production as you wish. First, only a few countries have oil reserves, and second, extracting and refining it is very expensive. And the countries with oil reserves are very protective of their natural resources. That's why Marcus thought of a solution to find a country with large oil reserves. He needed a country that was quite poor and had some corruption. All these conditions were met by one country, Nigeria, located in West Africa, which is the most resource-rich country in Africa with the largest oil and natural gas reserves. Seeing this, Shell set up its company in Nigeria in the 1940s, and this naturally rich country fell victim to greed for profit and power. Shell partnered with the Nigerian government so that no one could come between them and billions of dollars in profit. Now, whether you poison people's drinking water or the water going to farmers' fields, no one can stop you. Farmers were scared going to their fields, fearing that a match might accidentally catch fire and burn all the crops. Rivers had less water and more oil, and many farmers literally swam through the oil to reach their fields. All the waves were empty because of the oil. When people opened the tap for water, oil came out instead. Cancer started spreading among people, and diseases began to spread that had never been heard of before. Fields became barren, and people were forced to start protests against Shell. But when the government is your partner, protests can't harm you. In the 1990s, the army was called to suppress protests against Shell, and they fired bullets at unarmed people and threw grenades. 80 people were killed, and 600 homes were burned. These people's only crime was raising their voices against a company that had poisoned their drinking water and fields. Because of Shell, their children were dying from cancer. Shell was not affected by this tragedy at all. Just 3 years later, in 1993, during protests against a new pipeline, the Nigerian army directly fired at the protesters on Shell's orders, resulting in 1 death and 11 injuries. You might be wondering how the Nigerian military could shoot at its own people for a company. Friends, Shell was not just working with the government, they were also heavily funding Nigerian army generals. Along with this, Shell had gifted the Nigerian army state-of-the-art guns, ships, and even helicopters. When everyone's common interest is the same, then what value do the protesters have? Shell had silenced everyone with money. Everything was under Shell's control except for one man. This man was named Ken Saro-Wiwa. Ken was a writer and environmental activist. Ken started a strong movement against Shell. He began raising awareness among people through the press, schools, colleges, universities, and even hospitals that Shell was destroying their lives. A crowd began to gather around Ken. Ken had only one mission: to remove Shell from Nigeria. Shell tried very hard to negotiate with Ken and buy him off, but they failed. Because Ken had a huge following, it became difficult for Shell to take action against him. Ken and his supporters began to stop Shell's operations. Trucks carrying oil were stopped on the road. Engineers working at the plants were threatened to leave Nigeria and return to their countries, and for the first time in history, Shell's operations began to be affected. Shell faced a setback. One man had become their biggest obstacle. To remove him, they needed a very smart plan. Shell's people sat down with Nigerian intelligence officers and devised a plan to eliminate Ken. 4 weeks later, 4 local chiefs from Ken's village were brutally murdered, and Ken and his supporters were blamed for it. However, on the day of this murder, Ken was not even in the village. A few people from Ken's village were bribed to provide false testimonies, and then a year later, in 1995, Ken and his 9 companions were hanged. The message was very clear: whoever goes against Shell will meet the same fate. The families of these 9 people filed a case against Shell in the Netherlands, and in 2017, 22 years later, Shell was found partially guilty for this tragedy. However, Shell was only fined $15 million. In 2018, a private property data leak in Dubai revealed that Shell had given $1.3 billion in gifts to the Nigerian petroleum minister and some Nigerian military generals. In this way, this company not only bought the government and military, but also created a good image for itself among ordinary people through media campaigns. In one ad, Shell presented itself as a company investing in environmentally friendly energy. In December 2011, 40,000 barrels leaked into the Niger River, literally turning it black. All the fish in the river died, and the surrounding fields were destroyed. People had no clean drinking water left. And in return, Shell only said that the leak was the fault of Nigerian petroleum workers, not theirs. In 2017, a study published revealed that children living within 10 kilometers of the Niger River had a 50% chance of dying in their first month. And if they survived, there was a 40% chance of being physically and mentally disabled. After all these incidents, the anger against Shell among Nigerians grew, and now many groups are fighting against Shell and the Nigerian government with weapons. A civil war-like situation has developed in Nigeria, and it is all because of one company. One company has destroyed an entire country because of its selfishness and greed. Just thinking about it is frightening. It shows how far humans can fall for money and power. The lives and property of others have no value. There are still many secrets to uncover in future videos. There are many crimes and many people whose wrongdoings we need to expose to the world. What do you think about this topic? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked today's video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. We'll meet again in the next video with another interesting topic. Take care, goodbye.